Welcome to Mental Makeover Radio, your go-to destination for meaningful conversations about mental health. I'm your host and your trusted therapist bestie, Cecilia Mannella. Join us as we explore the complexities and messiness of human experience by addressing your questions and concerns. I'm here to provide a straightforward and practical therapy advice. So grab your favorite beverage, whether it's tea, coffee, or whatever tickles your taste buds, and get ready to embark on a mental makeover. Thanks for tuning in to Mental Makeover Radio. I am Cecilia Mannella, and I am joined today by Mia Hanks. She is a survivor of narcissistic abuse. She was married to a covert narcissist for 29 years, and she's recently published a book, a memoir called Bridemaid. Welcome to the podcast, Mia.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Very excited to have you here and to talk about this topic. It's such a, I feel like, hot topic these days when we talk about narcissism. And I know that everyone's going to learn so much from this conversation. So I'm really glad that you're here.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I love just starting off with, how did you get here? Like, just give us a bit of an understanding of who you are, how you've come to be where you are in this place in life, just so we have a little bit of history from you.
Okay. So as you said, I was married to a covert narcissist for 29 years. I got married very young. I came from a very sheltered background. And, I didn't have any trauma in my past. I sort of was very naive, thinking that everyone is a good person. And truth be told, nobody warns you, to watch out for the narcissist next door. Right. So I fell into a trap basically, and it never occurred to me that someone could, have malicious motives, or that, that when the love bombing started, I thought it was real. It was too good to be true. And I thought it was true. So it was a lot of just me being naive and not really knowing to watch for those red flags. And I ended up married, and, before I knew it, I was, in this marriage. And of course I wanted to make things work. And over time, things just got a little bit worse and a little bit worse. Narcissists don't get better with age. They actually get worse with age.
They do get worse.
Fast forward about 27 years into the marriage, and I start to realize, hey, maybe this isn't good. Maybe this really, it all isn't my fault. And maybe I need to start looking into what's going on. And that's basically, where my story started, my post-marital story started. I did some independent research, and I just started Googling things like toxic relationships and is my marriage toxic? And I was pretty shocked by, the results, the things I was reading. Everything stacked up.
Right.
So, I ultimately, after 29 years, I ended my marriage and decided to write a book.
That's great. How old were you when you got married?
I was 21.
Oh, just a baby.
I was just a baby. Yeah.
Young. Well, and when you're in your early 20s, we have this idea that we know everything.
Of course, yeah.
And now that I'm almost 46, I realize how little I actually knew in my 20s. But then we're
don't have the life experience,
No, and we have the confidence that we know everything, but in fact, we don't really know very much, right?
Right.
So it can be very easy to kind of fall into a relationship and think it's something when you're young. I think when we're older, we just have a different perspective of things and different experiences.
That's true. Yes, very much.
Mm-hmm. At what point in your marriage do you feel like things, it's hard in retrospect, right? Hindsight's always 20/20, and hindsight's very unfair, because when you look back, you're like, oh, there it is. It goes right back to the beginning. But when you really think about it, for those who are listening and maybe questioning their relationship or wondering what to look out for, what did you notice that made you, kind of go, oh, that's weird?
I think one of the biggest kind of red flags that I noticed, the point at which I thought this just doesn't seem right, was I noticed obviously with narcissists, everything has to go their way. Everything is about them. Everything is about how things make them feel. And I noticed early in my marriage, I don't know, I think I had gotten the flu or something like that. I was sick. And instead of being sympathetic or empathetic, or thinking, hey, how can I, what can I do to help you? My ex-husband's response was to be mad. He was angry. Anytime that, I couldn't be basically a supply to him, I mean, what good am I if I'm sick, right? And so it's all about him and how things reflect on him. So I thought that was odd. He just didn't have any empathy. And so, but then you think, well, I guess that's just a personality quirk, and, maybe that's just how he is. And you try to reason it because you want to feel like you're living a normal life. And that's what I did for way too long. I would look past these red flags. It was always, I knew something was wrong when his reaction to things just didn't, it just didn't fit. He overreacted to things that just really didn't require that much of a reaction, but it all came down to, it's about him. But you want to normalize things, and you want to feel like you are living a normal life, and you want to look normal to the outside world. So that's what I spent most of my time doing, I think, was just trying to figure out how to make it look normal. And then, another red flag was I literally felt like I was walking on eggshells all the time.
Right.
You start thinking about 5 steps ahead always. You start planning what you're going to say. And, that's just not right. If you find yourself doing that, something's off for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a difference. I think, the challenge nowadays is like, there's the benefit of Google. Like you said, you Google things.
Yes.
Which gives you lots of information. And the drawback of that is that it's easy to put people in those categories too, to be like, oh, this person's such a narcissist because they make everything about themselves. But selfishness is very different than narcissism. Yes, absolutely. I mean, everybody, as humans, we all have narcissistic traits. It's part of being a human. So the term is overused, drastically overused. You really have to dig in and look at that DSM and there's 9 traits of a person with narcissistic personality disorder. I think you have to have 5 to be quote unquote, yes, you need 5.
Diagnosed.
Yeah.
These people are never diagnosed though, because that requires being self-aware, which they are not. So,
they have to think there's a problem.
Absolutely.
They have to admit that there's a problem in their life. And by definition, anyone who questions whether they're a narcissist or not a narcissist.
They're not a narcissist. That's right. So, I mean, they're never going to be diagnosed. These people aren't. And I don't know, I think I saw a statistic that 2% of the population has narcissistic personality disorder. Yeah, that's just the people who, agreed to be tested. My ex-husband would never be tested for such a crazy thing like that. There's nothing wrong with him. It's everybody else has a problem.
Yeah, I've read a recent research paper that was done that they were trying to figure out what is the randomized population of narcissism, and they did it under a guise of a different test. Like didn't say they were actually testing for narcissism, and they came back. They replicated that study several times, and they say the average is anywhere from 10 to 15% of the population is on the narcissism actual spectrum diagnosable. Yeah, that would be diagnosed, some more severe than others. But would meet the criteria for diagnosis is between 10 to 15%. And if that is true, it means that we're all in relationship with a narcissist. Whether it's your boss, coworker, your neighbor, your aunt, your uncle, your dad, your grandpa, grandma, like just by default of percentage, like you are in some sort of connection to someone who would be classified as a narcissist. So,
most likely. And you brought up an interesting point, which is, it is a spectrum disorder. So not everybody is as bad as, there are some that are worse, some that are, and I think you have narcissism. And then I think toward the end of the spectrum, you get into sociopath.
Yes.
And then psychopath.
Yes.
And, I think a lot of these narcissistic personality disorders border on
Yes.
a little bit of sociopath. So it can be scary.
For sure. 100%. And for me in the mental health world, that's where things get scary.
Yes.
When the diagnosis kind of moves in that spectrum from narcissism into sociopathology is where things get scary for people, because the abuse is really complex, because it's not really easy to identify. Gaslighting becomes really inundated in a relationship.
Yes,
and
it does.
There's a lot of fear of ending a relationship with someone who is in this kind of diagnosis, in this abusive pattern with somebody.
That's exactly where I found myself. It's a scary thing to think about. There's a lot of fear that comes into play when you think about leaving. And I think a lot of women don't, they just don't leave out of fear. Well, there's a lot of reasons people don't leave, but
for sure.
But fear is a big component.
At what point in your marriage did you come to the realization that you probably had to leave this relationship?
So we started going to marriage counseling.
Okay.
Another interesting thing about narcissists is a lot of them really enjoy going to therapy.
Yes, they do.
It seems crazy, but you swear these people are using the same playbook. They're all alike, but they do enjoy therapy. Because a lot of times therapy works for them. I mean, it works out to their benefit. They don't want therapy. They want to fix you. So he suggested we go to marriage therapy, which I said, yeah, sure. Maybe this will, maybe we can get some answers.
And I have to imagine at this point, it's also, it feels probably like, I hear this from a lot of women when it initially starts. It's like, well, he's the one that brought up therapy. That means he must love me. He must care about me. He must care about the marriage. And look at him. He's, wanting to go to therapy, wanting to fix things. So it's weirdly a setup for hope.
Yeah, it is. It is
couched in emotional manipulation.
It's very manipulative. And a lot of therapists, I mean, not all, thank goodness, but a lot of therapists will fall for these narcissists. They'll fall for their tricks, So we ended up with, we actually went to 2 different therapists, and one was just, she just thought he was pretty charming. The other therapist we saw had a little more experience, and we probably saw her about 10 different sessions. And finally, after about the 10th session, she looked at him and she said, I cannot in good conscience take your money anymore. She said, I can't help you. And she looked right at him and said, you're not self-aware. You cannot see things from other people's perspectives. And she said, I just need to, wish you well. And I hope you guys, find happiness. But she said, I can't help you. And she was looking right at him. So, at that point I thought, wow, I've never seen someone get kicked out of therapy. I mean, that's big. And then later I had a one-on-one session with her, and she told me, she said, you need to get out. Well, I mean, she asked me, she said, do you want out? And I said, I want out so bad. And she said, you need to go. So that's, it gave me some validation. And I still dealt with a lot of guilt when I left. That was a really difficult time because, you feel like I've just broken up this 29-year marriage and my family, and I'm going to be such a disappointment. And so I did deal with all of that guilt, but it did take some validation from a professional to finally kind of push me over the edge and say, I've got to get out.
Yeah. What was the leaving process like? Because I know that's a very overwhelming. I mean,
it's
ending
scary.
A relationship, even without narcissism, without any complex mental health issues, is difficult and hard.
Right.
So
it's scary because I didn't know how he would react. He had led me to believe that if I ever did try to leave, he would harm himself. I absolutely believed him. Very common. I absolutely believed him. At this point, I'm still trauma bonded. I'm still not. I'm not seeing things clearly. I've been living in this disastrous psychological manipulation for so many years. So I didn't know but that he wouldn't try to hurt himself. So that was very, very scary. A lot of times you hear the best way to leave a narcissist is to go no contact. I kind of disagree with that. Okay. To me, that felt like, that might make him more volatile. I just didn't think that was the way to go. And so I kind of went slow contact, and it just phased out. So yeah, there wasn't a big announcement, I'm leaving, anything like that. I had my parents lived near me, and I started spending more time at their house. I started spending the night there a few nights a week, and it just sort of phased out. The point at which he discovered that I just wasn't coming back. It got a little scary. I didn't know really what he would do, because they get angry when you kind of expose them, or in my case, just telling him no. This is a guy who's never been told no in his life. Right. And so that he sees that as the ultimate betrayal. So yeah, I was a little unnerved, for a while. It's not a fun thing, but it was necessary. Right. Not fun, but necessary.
What was the length of that process for you?
I left, and then I actually waited a year to file for divorce. It just didn't feel right in the early stages, because I felt like I couldn't predict what his reaction was going to be. Right. And so what I did was I found a good therapist who had somewhat of a specialty in this, and I went to therapy for a year. And finally, worked up enough. I had a lot of healing to do before I could even think about getting a lawyer and filing divorce papers. So it did take a year, and then the divorce process took almost a year in and of itself. But then that was, then it took another kind of downward dive when I filed those divorce papers, because you kind of go through the fear all over again. What's he going to do? How's he going to react? So that was a little scary too. But, in the end, it all worked out. So it was a dramatic journey.
Can I ask about the threats of self-harm for him? Did he ever follow through with any of it?
He never did. And that is something that he did throughout the marriage. He almost used it as blackmail. Yeah. In fact, he did. I mean, he basically did blackmail me. And I write about it in my book. But yeah, it was, he used that as emotional blackmail. That was always his go-to. If he didn't feel like he was getting enough attention, if I was paying more attention to my kids than him, if he just wasn't feeling like he was important enough, that was always his go-to was, right. And that was, and he knew he could get a reaction out of me every time. He knew that I would cave every single time. And I did, because I didn't know that, what are you supposed to do when somebody says that to you? I mean, you feel like you've got to believe them.
Right. Because you feel like an asshole if you don't.
Exactly. I mean, and all I can think is, what if he really did something?
Right. Then what?
Then what? And I spoke with my therapist about it, prior to filing for divorce. I said, I don't know that he wouldn't do something. And she said, more than likely he won't. But if he does, that's on him. And so I just kind of had to let that go and say, I hope he's not that stupid. Right. But, I can't take responsibility for that.
Right. And I think most people misunderstand that piece of self-harm. Like, I think there's this public opinion, let's say, or understanding of narcissism as very grandiose, very in control, very powerful, which is all true, very charming. Right. But what we don't really talk a lot about is the underbelly of the emotional manipulation, which is when they have a sense of not being in control or being the most powerful in a relationship.
And that's when they get volatile. Yes.
It's when they get volatile, for sure. And then the threat of suicide shows up, because what that does is that the focus then is not, they're back to being a victim. So they're either in control by having power over other people, which can be emotional, financial. It can look in very many ways. And when someone says no, or I can't continue to give to the empty well that it can never be full
Yes.
of you, then the flip side is like, then they become a victim. And
yes,
then
that is exactly how and I mean,
it's a
the
cycle, for
biggest
sure.
victim, the biggest victim that ever lived, and he loved being the victim. So if he wasn't totally in control, then he went completely the other direction, and he was just the absolute. It was just everybody should pity him.
Right. And it's the pendulum swing. I want everyone to who's listening to understand this isn't, I'm not minimizing people who have suicidal thoughts. It's not about that. It's the complete pendulum swing from one extreme of, charismatic, I have everything under control, that kind of personality, to pendulum swing very quickly to I'm going to kill myself. I'm not worthy. It's very extreme. And then what it does for the other person, so like for you or someone who's in relationship with someone who's a narcissist, is you drop the argument, you drop your boundaries, you drop the no, you drop everything you're doing to respond to the crisis at hand. And that's actually a really normal human reaction. It'd be really weird if someone didn't.
It would be. And that was interesting the way you described that, because before I knew about narcissism and really what was going on with him, one thing early in the marriage, I remember one day doing some reading on bipolar. I thought maybe he's bipolar,
right?
And I started reading up on that, but it just didn't fit. And I thought, well, I guess maybe I'm the crazy one.
Well, there's that piece. Let's talk about that. We're talking a lot about the other person being a narcissist, but what are the effects that you found on you?
I found
in being in relationship with someone like that.
There are a lot of health effects. And that's ultimately what I think drove me to start figuring out what's going on. It was really affecting my health. It's not just mental abuse, but that mental abuse affects your physical health.
Absolutely.
And I was literally just falling apart under the stress that I was living under. One thing that I was dealing with was lack of sleep. And towards, the latter part of my marriage, I swear he was trying to sleep deprive me. And it sounds crazy, and he would adamantly disagree. But yeah, he wanted. He didn't want me to sleep if he wasn't sleeping. He didn't want me to fall asleep first. If I fell asleep or if I needed to take a nap, I was seen as weak. What is wrong with you? You don't need that much sleep. And when in effect, I was so overexhausted that it was really affecting. I was having chronic pain, all kinds of things. And the lack of sleep was really getting to me. But I think narcissists like that, the whole sleep deprivation. I mean, it's kind of a torture type of thing. And what it does is it keeps you in a fog, and it makes you easier to manipulate and easier to control. So I think that's maybe what his motive was underneath it all. But that was, the lack of sleep, the chronic pain, the stress. And I just kind of lived in a fight or flight mode all the time. So it will break you down physically.
It will break you down physically. Lack of sleep, migraines, headaches, body aches, like just having like back pain, shoulder pain, because when we're stressed, our bodies get really, really tense. Yeah. So that's usually felt in your neck and your shoulders and your back. So you start to get like chronic pain issues, gut issues, right? Like all of a sudden you've got gastrointestinal issues, like
I did too.
Yeah, like constipation or just complete like diarrhea, which is a lot of TMI, but we're going to do it anyways.
Yeah,
heart palpitations,
constant
panic attacks, anxiety attacks, like shakiness, like where you actually like your hand is shaking, like
your hands shake. Yes, I was having anxiety attacks. I mean, multiple a week. The heart racing, the palpitations, stomach aches, feeling nauseous all the time. When he was around, I can remember, I would try to stay out of the house as much as possible. In those last couple of years, it was just deteriorating so bad that I would just find errands to do to get out of the house. And I can recall, I'd finish my errands and I would pull back into the driveway, and pulling in the driveway, I just started feeling nauseous. Yeah. So, it was awful. Yeah. It really does affect your
really
health.
Does. And those are the signs, right? And I also want to for us to remember. Also, that's not where it starts.
Right.
Right. It starts off in the fairy tale.
It does. It starts off very slow, very slow.
And I really do think that, you know, the Disney princesses and all the romantic comedies and everything that we've been socialized to believe as love and falling in love really rereplicates a narcissistic bond. This like,
I had never thought of that, but it is. You if you watch enough of that stuff, you start to normalize love bombing.
Right.
I mean, that's
Prince
basically
Charming.
what you're seeing.
I'm
right?
being
They're
swept
perfect.
off my feet. They're perfect. They're so amazing. You know, there's this idea that, you know, you're being rescued. There's someone to take care of you. There's someone who, all these things that we see as romantic, as in like, oh, you're ordering dinner for me. You're ordering my drink for me. Or, you know, you're so protective. You're so caring. So you don't want me to hang out with my friend who pisses me off sometimes. Or you think my sister is being, you know, really bitchy because this is our dynamic. So now you're encouraging me to create some distance in that relationship, and because you love me so much,
you know, but we don't see it as control.
We don't see it as control.
No.
And so it evolves over time. I think that's something for everyone to realize and to let go of the shame and guilt of not seeing it to begin with. I hear a lot of women say, like, I just didn't see it. I feel like such a fool. Like, how did I not see it? I felt
the same way. Yeah. I mean, and then you're so wrapped up in it and you're so intertwined with this other person and this marriage that you think, well, there's no way I can get out now. It's just too complicated and I'm stuck. The other big issue I think that a lot of women face, probably more women than men, is the financial abuse.
Share more about that. What has been your experience with that?
So my experience, fortunately, I have my parents. And my husband's a very, very wealthy man. But, you know, he controlled all the money. So I didn't realize until I left how little control I had over the money. I had access to the everyday checking account, which was fine. It was fine. But then when I left, you know, he liked to keep that balance as low as possible. He basically drained the account. And, you know, just something simple as buying groceries, I really couldn't do, because he was trying to kind of choke me out and, keep that balance so low. But I think, for a lot of people, if they don't have somewhere to go, you know, if they don't have a family member or a friend that can help them out, for me, you know, I lived in this big, beautiful home behind gates. If I hadn't had my parents, my only option would have been to go to a shelter.
Right.
Because think about it. If you want to say, I'm going to move out and I'm going to get an apartment, well, what do you have to get an apartment? You need pay stubs, you know, to show, well, I didn't work. You know, you need to show you have access to funds to pay rent. I didn't have any of that. I could have gathered up enough to stay in a hotel for a few nights, but what's that, you know, how's that going to help me?
Right.
So if you don't have somewhere to go, and it takes a while to work through the legal system, you know, and get the interim, you know, finances set while you're in the middle of a divorce. It takes a while to get all of that worked out. So yeah, the financial abuse, that really traps a lot of women, especially into these relationships, because they have no access to money to get out. And you can't leave without money.
You can't leave with it because you can't, you know, you're not going to furnish a place. Even if you were to secure a place to go, you got to furnish that place. You got to eat. You got to pay, like, you got to have heat. You got to have hydro. You got to have, like, you've got to have some of the amenities, and you can't get that. And it brings up a really good point, because I don't think a lot of women realize the lack of connection to finances until it becomes a problem.
Until you leave and realize
until you're trying to leave.
Yeah. And then you think, well, wow, I don't have access to, he's got all these accounts, but I didn't have access to them. And while I was married, it didn't matter because, you know, anything I wanted, well, you know, I basically got. And I didn't need to have access to those funds. He did, and it was all good. But once I left, I realized I can't access any of this. And then what I can access, he's purposely draining because he's angry. And he, you know, he would like for me to have starved. I mean, that would have been, this is a guy with no empathy. You know, I wronged him. I left. Therefore, I deserve to not eat. I deserve
You're the enemy now.
I'm the enemy,
Yeah.
and you can go from being married 29 years to, he would like to see me living under the freeway. That wouldn't have bothered him a bit. So
Not at all. Yeah.
it's amazing how you think, the lack of caring, you would think at least he would want me to be safe. But no, not at all.
Well, and money in our culture, in our society, is such a status symbol. So it is very typical for narcissists to be wealthy or to figure out a way to build wealth, because it is like the number one status symbol of our society.
Of course.
So they use that in a way. And again, that's part of that Prince Charming story, right? It's like, oh, I don't have to worry. I've been taken care of. And this is super great, until it's not super great. Then you find yourself being stuck in a situation that you can't get out of.
Well, money is power. And that's a big portion of their power is money, which then makes, divorcing a narcissist a total nightmare, because they're not going to relinquish that power. So they'll do anything they can. They will draw out the divorce as long as they can.
They sure will.
To try to get you to just fold and say, I don't want to pay any more legal fees. They don't care. They'll just, they want you to give in ultimately.
Right.
And so divorce is interesting. Yeah.
It is. Looking back to your separation and divorce process, what would you have done differently looking back? Like, if someone's in that process, what tips would you give them, things to be mindful of, like, that would help?
I think the number one thing I would have done is I would have stockpiled more money before I left.
Yeah.
I never dreamt that he would, try to cut me off like he did. So definitely and it takes a lot of planning. You really need to plan it out. You don't just leave and not have a pretty good idea of what you're going to do.
Right.
There are a lot of steps you can take prior. And one thing is making sure that you, that you do have some money. And one tip I would say is, it sounds simple, but it sounds minor, but I think it adds up in the end. Every time you go to the grocery store, get cash back.
Yes.
All these little things like that. You can stockpile, a good amount of money to help you out. You can just assume that they're going to cut you off, so you need to have that money. The other thing is you need to go ahead and access all of your personal documents, birth certificate, passport. You need that stuff. And that's something that might be difficult to get when you get into the thick of a divorce. I would just say anything important, you need to go ahead and remove it from the house. Go ahead and take it, and be sure that you have cash. Mm-hmm. It sounds like this is crazy. Who would think that, this is like something out of a movie, but, it's true. You really do need to plan and take these steps to really know what you're going to do. Don't just do it on a whim. Mm-hmm. Because these people are smart,
They are. And they're all the tips that I would give anyone leaving an abusive relationship, right? Go open your own bank account at a separate bank.
Yes. That's another good one. Yes, go ahead and open your own account.
Doesn't bank at. So figure out what bank they don't bank at and go open an account at that bank, right? Like, get a credit card potentially in your name, but keep it in a safe deposit box. So you have access to it, but you don't have to have it on you.
Yes.
All your documents, passports, birth certificates, everything like that you need. If you need to order a second copy of it, do it and keep it in a secure place outside of the home. So with a friend, a family member, somebody that they can keep it safe for you, right? The cash back at the grocery stores is like the place to get cash.
Or the other thing you can do is you can hide it. The other thing that you can do is, again, when you're grocery shopping, you can buy a gift card here and there. Mm-hmm. Buy a Visa gift card.
That's a great idea.
And just keep a stash, because you will need the money. You will need the money. And obviously the biggest tip of all is keep your plans secret.
Keep your plans secret is really important, because I think that dealing with someone who has narcissistic personality disorders, you cannot underestimate how cunning they are.
Yes.
Like, there's smart people in the world, but people who have narcissistic personality disorder, they're very cunning.
They are.
That they can anticipate what's going to happen before you decide that's what you're going to do. They're playing a game of chess and they're 20 moves ahead of you.
They are. And the other thing to know about narcissistic personality disorder is they tend to be very paranoid. So that was my ex-husband. He thought everyone was out to get him. He thought everyone wanted what he had. So he
everyone's
did.
jealous. Everybody's envious.
Jealous.
Everybody's out to like, learn from him, steal from him, do something, like get something from him. Right.
Yep,
so
that's exactly
very, very paranoid. Yes.
You just described him to a T. Yeah. So they are about 20 steps ahead of you in a game of chess. That's very accurate. They
really are. And here I tell women all the time, it's like, there's no point in trying to outsmart them.
No, there's not.
Because you'd have to think like a narcissist to understand what's happening. And the truth is that's actually really difficult, because if you're not a narcissist, it doesn't make sense to you. Right?
Yeah, like his logic, you can't reason with this guy because his logic is not normal logic. You can't anticipate what he's going to do because he does not think like a normal person thinks. So then that leads to the fear, because you can't anticipate what their next move's going to be, or if they get triggered because you left, you really can't anticipate what they're going to do. So the not knowing is scary.
It is scary. And the other thing I think is really important is to not do this alone. Like when you're leaving or thinking about leaving or in the process of divorce, like you need connection and community. So if you've had broken relationships because of this relationship, so if you've lost friends or sibling relation, try to reignite those again in secret away from your partner. But try to have a community of people, because you can't. I don't think we can do this alone. It's very scary to do alone. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. And people that are that isolated, and a lot of people do end up that isolated. You can't get out. I just don't think you can hardly get out by yourself. You really need a support system. I totally agree. And even if it's just one person, it just takes one person to support you. Yeah. Even if it's a therapist, even if someone you have to pay, at least it's somebody that can help you through that process. Because I think it's really, it is crazy making, as you would know, Mia. The way that they gaslight is it leaves you feeling like you're crazy.
You do. Yeah. You're almost afraid to tell anybody what's going on, so you're for a long time, I was not sure if, am I crazy, or is crazy? Who's crazy?
It's true. I'm a therapist, and I work with lots of couples, and I work with couples who, and one of them is a narcissist, and they've even tried to they'll try to gaslight me in a session.
Yes, absolutely.
Or they'll use the words that I say to try to gaslight their partner after the session. And so there really is no limits to what they will do to try to win or get their way or have someone agree with them. And I think that's really important. It's not that you're not strong enough or not good enough or not smart enough to figure this out. It's that they're playing a totally different game. It's like you're playing chess, checkers, and they're playing chess.
Yeah, that's right.
You're playing a different game, and it's not a competition. It's about safety at the front end. It's mostly safety.
Right. One of the questions that I get asked the most is, why did you stay for 29 years? A lot of people that, aren't in this kind of situation, they just can't fathom, why didn't you just get out? And when I was doing some research for my book, I ran across this quote. It's this short little paragraph, and it's actually by the author Stephen King. And I believe that this is something he said in an interview. And it's like I say, it's a short little paragraph, but I think it's interesting, because it's the best explanation that I can give that I've ever seen for why somebody might stay in a relationship like this for so long. So if you don't mind, I'd like to share.
Yeah, we love it.
Yeah, I love this. Okay, here it goes. There's a phrase, the elephant in the living room, which purports to describe what it's like to live with a drug addict, an alcoholic, and abuser. People outside such relationships will sometimes ask, how could you let such a business go on for so many years? Didn't you see the elephant in the living room? And it's so hard for anyone living in a more normal situation to understand the answer that comes closest to the truth. I'm sorry, but it was there when I moved in. I didn't know it was an elephant. I thought it was part of the furniture. There comes an aha moment for some folks, the lucky ones, when they suddenly recognize the difference.
Oh, I love that.
It's a very good explanation. And I think, for me, getting into this relationship so young, you want to normalize it. And yeah, I love the part that says, I thought it was part of the furniture. And I just wonder how many women especially are in these relationships, and, you know, that is how they are, what they think. And then they get so far into it, and then it's almost embarrassing to admit that I thought it was part of the furniture, you know, but I just have to wonder if, you know, that's not a reason why a lot of people do end up staying for so long, is that they normalize it.
Well, you know, it's just the natural thing to do is to normalize, right? And I think we just need to be compassionate towards other women and other people, so we're not judging so quickly at people's circumstances.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be a lot of self-compassion as well. And I think that's probably part of your healing process, and most people's healing process after a relationship with a narcissistic person is that self-compassion, right? It's like you don't know what you don't know until you know it.
Until you know it. Yeah.
And then when you know it and you see it, like when you see the elephant, you can kind of go, holy shit, there's an elephant in the room. I didn't even notice. So like now I can't not see it. Right. Like, but until you don't see it, you don't see it. Right. Like, and we're so hard on people, and we love to judge and say, well, how come you didn't see that? And we judge the person instead of saying how awful that you felt like you had to stay in this relationship for so long.
Yes. How awful that you felt like you had to normalize that abuse. Yeah.
Right. We instantly want to blame victims and go, well, you should have said something. You should have left earlier. You shoulda.
Yeah.
And we should all over them instead of showing up with compassion and some love.
True. Very true.
Right.
Yeah.
What has it been like? I mean, this is a really personal question, but what's it been like healing from this? And do you continue to co-parent with him? Like what? Because I know that's a very complicated issue.
Yes,
when you're co-parenting with a narcissist.
So I'm lucky in that our kids are grown. I mean, they're both adults, and so I don't have.
Did you wait till they were adults before you left?
You know, I did. Yeah. My son was finishing high school when I left, but and that did remove a very big piece that could be very complicated.
Yeah.
So I don't have experience with the whole co-parenting thing, so to speak. But healing, it's been interesting. I did a lot of therapy. And I think writing about it really was therapeutic as well. I felt a little more validated after I finished my book, because when you step outside and you are telling your story to somebody else or writing it, you see it from a different perspective. And for me, it was, I'm like, I think this is maybe worse than I originally thought. So it's been validating. It's been an interesting journey.
Writing is, I promote journaling and writing all the time because it gives you insight in a way that nothing else really does. There's something about writing that is almost like magical in what it does for healing your heart and allowing you to gain perspective and to see it from a different viewpoint.
It is a different viewpoint. Yeah, definitely it is.
And being able to share your story that is a gift, so that someone else, at least one person doesn't feel alone in it, that can say, oh my gosh, this is exactly my story. This is so similar to me. I have so much in common. And there's a thread of hope in it because. Yeah,
that's what I'm hoping. Yes.
Yeah. You don't have to stay in these relationships. And I know they're complicated and tough and money is a big issue, but family intertwinement of relationships and raising kids together, and there's all these layers that make things really complicated, but there's always, there's hope in getting to the other side of things.
Yes, there is.
Mia, where can people find you?
So right now my main social media is TikTok. I have a page on there called NPD, as in Narcissistic Personality Disorder, NPD and Me. And I post every day. Lots of tips and, tips for leaving a narcissist and lots of information about narcissism. Just trying to help people understand what it is and, if they're experiencing it, what they're going through. So there's a lot of good info on there. Then my book is basically available online anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Walmart, Target, Barnes & Noble, and it's available in paperback and ebook.
That's fantastic. And it's called Bride Bridemaid.
Bridemaid, yes.
Yeah, and we'll throw I'll throw a link in the show notes for your link to talk and to your book as well, so people can find it wherever they'd like to.
Okay, thank you so much.
So thanks so much for being on the podcast, Mia. This was super great.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.